The alarm on my wrist pulsed twice before I even opened my eyes, and I already knew something was wrong, because that alarm only rings for one reason. Someone from the old registry had been found, a name I sealed away when I was young and foolish, and certain that fate could not be questioned. I sat up in the dark of my chamber aboard the outpost, my tail curling tight around my legs, and stared at the small glowing screen until the letters stopped shaking in my vision. Dane Osei, human, logistics division, currently stationed here, on this very outpost, 3 corridors from my own quarters. I had chosen him 9 years ago. He did not know it. He had never known it. And in the next few hours, I would have to decide whether to keep that secret buried forever, or walk into his life and tell him the truth that could either free me or destroy everything I had built. My name is Kesari von Aurelius, and I am the heir to the Thessaly Vulpine dominion. Among my people, when a young noble comes of age, we perform something called the choosing rite. It is not a proposal, it is not a request. It is a binding, made once, made silently, made forever. You look upon another being, you let your scent thread wrap around the memory of them, and from that moment on, your heart belongs to them, whether they know it or not. No vixen in the recorded history of my bloodline had ever chosen someone who refused her, because no vixen had ever chosen a human before knowing that humans could say no. I did. I was 16 cycles old, visiting a joint outpost with my mother during an early diplomatic tour, back when contact with Earth was still new and fragile, and full of careful smiles. I remember standing behind a reinforced viewport, watching engineers move through a docking bay far below, and one of them looked up. He was young too, maybe 18 in human years, wearing a scuffed uniform with a tool belt slung low on his hip, and he smiled at me. Not the careful, practiced smile diplomats give each other. A real one, surprised and warm, like he hadn't expected anyone to be watching him at all. I performed the rite right there, behind the glass, without a single word passing between us. For 9 years I carried that bond like a secret ember. I told no one. I dated no one. I let ministers and dukes across the Dominion propose alliances through marriage, and I refused every one of them, citing tradition, citing the sanctity of the choosing, never telling anyone that my choosing had already happened, sealed to a human boy who did not even know my name. Now the registry had found him again, reassigned to my own outpost, and my hands would not stop shaking as I dressed for the day. I told myself I would simply observe him from a distance. That was the safe plan. I would confirm it was truly him, confirm he was well, and then decide later, with a clear head, what to do next. But safe plans rarely survive contact with the truth, and mine did not survive past breakfast. I saw him in the mess hall, laughing with 2 other technicians over something on a datapad, and the sound hit me like a physical thing. 9 years had changed his face, sharpened it, given him a small scar above one eyebrow, and lines at the corners of his eyes from squinting at machinery under bright lights. But it was him. I knew it the way I know my own name, the way my blood knew it, before my mind caught up. I did not walk toward him. I turned and left before he could see me, and I spent the rest of the day pretending to review supply manifests while my mind ran in circles so tight I thought I might be sick. By evening, I understood something that terrified me more than the discovery itself. On my world, the choosing is not questioned. If I performed it, then by our law, he belonged to me the moment I made the vow, whether or not he ever agreed. Our elders would say the bond simply needed to be revealed to him, and he would feel it too, because that is how it always worked among our own kind. But he was not our own kind. He was human. And humans, I had learned slowly over years of study, did not accept a thing simply because someone else had decided it for them. Humans asked questions. Humans said no. I had never once considered that he might say no to me, because for 9 years, the idea that anyone could refuse a choosing had never crossed my mind. Now it was the only thought I had. I requested a private meeting the next morning, framing it through diplomatic channels as a routine review of outpost logistics between our 2 divisions, because I could not bring myself to write the truth into any official request. He accepted without hesitation. Humans rarely refuse a meeting with a visiting dignitary, even a nervous one hiding behind formal language. He arrived at the small conference room precisely on time, And when the door slid open and he stepped inside, I felt the old thread in my chest pull taut, the way it always did whenever I let myself think of him, except now the thread had a face again, close enough to touch. He greeted me properly, with the correct bow of the head that our protocol officers had clearly trained the human staff to use, and he said it was an honor to finally meet the Crown heir in person. I told him to sit. My voice came out steadier than I expected, which surprised me more than anything else that day. I did not plan what I said next. I had rehearsed a dozen versions of this conversation the night before, careful diplomatic phrasing, soft introductions, gentle approaches. All of it left me the moment he sat across from me and looked at me with open, curious eyes, the same eyes that had looked up at a viewport 9 years ago and smiled at a stranger. I told him everything. I told him about the choosing right, what it means among my people, how it is performed, how binding it is considered under our law. I told him about the day on the old outpost, the viewport, the smile he probably didn't even remember giving. I told him that from that moment, I had considered myself bound to him, that I had refused every marriage proposal offered to me since, that I had carried his memory like a vow for 9 years without his knowledge or his consent. I watched his face while I spoke, and I braced myself for every reaction I feared: anger, disgust, fear, the kind of horror a person shows when they learn someone has made a claim on their life without asking. He did not show any of those things. He listened. He listened the entire time without interrupting, his expression shifting slowly from confusion to something quieter, something more careful, and when I finally finished speaking, the silence in the room stretched long enough that I nearly apologized just to fill it. Instead, he asked me a question I did not expect. He asked if it hurt me, all these years, keeping it silent. Not whether I had the right to choose him, not whether the custom was strange or wrong. He asked about the weight of it, the cost of it to me, as if my pain mattered as much as the fact of what I had done. I did not have an answer ready for that. I told him the truth, that yes, it had hurt, that watching him laugh in the mess hall the day before had nearly broken something loose in my chest that I had held together for 9 years, through sheer stubbornness. He asked more questions after that. He wanted to understand what would happen to me, under our law, if the choosing was never returned. I explained that an unreturned choosing marks a noble as unfit for further bonds within the Dominion, a quiet, permanent shame carried for the rest of one's life. He asked what would happen if he simply said no, right now, plainly, without ceremony. I told him that under our old law, my vow would still stand regardless of his answer, because the choosing was never designed with the idea that the other person could refuse it. He sat back at that, and for the first time since I began speaking, I saw something sharpen in his eyes that was not anger, but was close to it. He said that did not sound fair to him. He said a bond that does not require the other person's agreement is not really a bond at all. It is just a decision one person makes about another person's life, and no custom, however old, changes that fact. I had spent 9 years believing my people's tradition was simply how the universe worked, the way gravity works, the way the sun rises. Hearing him say it plainly, without cruelty, without disrespect, just honest and clear, cracked something open in me that I did not know needed cracking. He was right, and some small part of me had always known it, buried under the certainty everyone around me had drilled into my thinking since I was a kid. I asked him then, quietly, what he wanted. Not what our law demanded, not what tradition expected, but what he, Dane Osei, actually wanted, now that he knew the truth. He did not answer right away. He told me he needed to think, and that he would not give me an answer just to make the moment easier, because he respected me too much to lie about something this large. I told him I understood, though my chest ached with every word. He stood, thanked me for trusting him with the truth, and left the room, and I sat alone for a long time after the door closed, staring at the empty chair across from me, wondering if I had just freed myself, or lost everything in the same breath. The days that followed were the hardest of my life, and I say that as someone who has survived diplomatic crises, border disputes, and the death of my own father, when I was still too young to understand grief properly. Nothing compared to the waiting. I did not seek him out. I forced myself to hold to that one discipline, because I had already taken enough from him without his permission, and I would not take his time or his comfort as well. I buried myself in outpost work, reviewing supply chains and trade agreements, anything to keep my hands and my mind occupied, though every evening I found myself standing at the viewport nearest my quarters, watching the docking bay below the way I once had as a girl, half hoping and half dreading that I would see him there. On the fourth day, my mother contacted me from the homeworld. Word had reached the royal court, as word always does, that the crown heir had requested an unusual private meeting with a human technician, and the ministers were already whispering theories, most of them wrong, some of them uncomfortably close to the truth. My mother did not scold me. She simply asked if I had finally told him. I admitted that I had. She was quiet on the other end of the transmission for a long moment, and then she said something I did not expect from a woman who had spent her entire reign upholding every tradition of our people without exception. She told me that her own mother, my grandmother, had once confided a similar secret near the end of her life, a choosing made in her youth towards someone who never knew, someone she never told, someone she let go to her grave still ignorant of the bond. My grandmother had called it her greatest regret, not because the right existed, but because she never gave the other person the chance to choose her back. My mother told me that whatever happened with Dane, whatever he decided, I had already done something braver than 2 generations of our family combined, simply by telling him the truth and letting him hold his own answer in his own hands. I did not know how much I needed to hear that until the words were already sitting in my chest, easing something that had been clenched tight since the day the alarm first pulsed on my wrist. On the 6th day, Dane requested a meeting with me. I do not remember walking to the conference room. I remember standing outside the door, smoothing the front of my uniform 3 times, though there was nothing wrong with it, and I remember the door sliding open to reveal him already seated inside, waiting for me this time instead of the other way around. He stood when I entered, which surprised me, since our early meetings had not required such formality, and something in the careful way he held himself told me this conversation mattered to him as much as it mattered to me. He said he had spent the last 6 days thinking about almost nothing else. He told me he had read everything he could find about the choosing right in the outpost archives, had spoken carefully, without revealing names, to one of the cultural liaison officers about how the custom worked and what it meant to my people across our long history. He said he wanted to understand it properly before he gave me any kind of answer, because he did not think it was fair to judge a tradition he barely understood, even one that had been used, without his knowledge, on him. I told him he owed me no such courtesy, that I was the one who had wronged him, not the reverse. He shook his head at that. He said I had not wronged him the way I seemed to believe. A choice made about him without his knowledge was not the same as an action taken against him, especially since I had held that choice in silence for 9 years, asking nothing of him, taking nothing from him, until the moment I finally told him the truth and let him decide for himself. He said the wrong would only have happened if I had tried to force the bond after he learned of it, or hidden it from him forever. Instead, I had done the harder thing. I had told him, knowing full well he might reject it entirely. Then he said something that I have carried with me every day since. He said that on my world, a choosing might be considered complete the moment it is made. But where he came from, a bond only means something when both people agree to it freely, with open eyes, understanding exactly what they are agreeing to. He said he could not accept a vow made when he was a stranger behind a piece of reinforced glass, a vow he never knew existed until 6 days ago. But he said that did not mean the answer had to be no. He asked if my people had any tradition for a second choosing, one that required both parties to speak the vow together, with full understanding, freely given. I told him, my voice barely steady, that such a right existed, though it was rare almost to the point of legend. We call it the second right. It requires both people to stand before witnesses and speak the vow aloud, together, with full knowledge of what they are choosing. Unlike the first right, which one person can perform alone, in silence, without the other's awareness, the second right cannot be completed unless both people agree, out loud, in that exact moment. He asked if I would be willing to perform it with him, not because tradition demanded it, and not because of what happened 9 years ago, but because of what he had come to feel over these past 6 days, getting to know the woman behind that old, silent vow. I do not have adequate words for what happened in my chest when he said that. 9 years of carrying a secret alone. 9 years of refusing every offered match. 9 years of believing my heart already belonged to someone who might never want it. And now that same someone was asking, freely, with his own voice, to choose me back. I told him yes. We performed the second rite 3 weeks later, in a small ceremony attended only by our closest colleagues from both divisions of the outpost. No royal court, no press, no grand hall filled with strangers watching. My mother traveled from the homeworld herself, standing as witness alongside 2 of Dane's closest friends from the technical crew, and when the moment came, we stood together, facing each other, and spoke the vow aloud, each of us in our own voice, each of us choosing freely, with full knowledge of everything the choice would mean. There is a strange kind of peace that comes from finally releasing a secret you have carried too long, and an even stranger, brighter kind of peace that comes from having that secret answered not with obligation, but with a real, chosen yes. I think back sometimes to that girl behind the viewport, 16 years old, watching a human engineer smile up at her without knowing what her heart had just done in that instant. She believed, with the simple certainty of youth, that the choosing was already complete the moment she made it, that nothing more was needed, that fate had settled the matter, and there was nothing left to do but wait. She was wrong, though I cannot fault her too harshly, since it took me 9 more years, and one very patient, very honest human being, to understand what she had missed. A bond built on silence is not the same as a bond built on truth. A vow spoken by one person alone is not the same as a vow spoken together, freely, by 2 people who understand exactly what they are choosing. I chose him before I knew humans could say no. He chose me after he learned that he could. And of the 2 vows, the second one is the one I trust with my whole heart, because it did not come from an old law or an ancient custom or a girl's certainty behind a piece of glass. It came from him, standing across from me with open eyes, giving me something no tradition of my people had ever been able to guarantee. A choice, freely made and freely kept.